Marcus Rodriguez pushed his cleaning cart down the pristine corridor of the Zephyrian Medical Complex, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished blue floor. 3 months into his job as the night janitor, he still marveled at the alien architecture around him. The walls curved organically, pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow that the Zephyrians claimed helped their healing processes. The pay was decent for someone with no formal education beyond high school, and Marcus needed every credit he could earn to send back to his sister on Earth. The Zephyrians had been surprisingly welcoming to human workers, though most positions were relegated to manual labor and service roles. Marcus didn't mind. Honest work was honest work, regardless of what planet you did it on. As he approached the nursery wing, a sound made him pause. Crying. Not the soft whimpering he occasionally heard from recovering patients, but the full-throated wailing of distressed infants. The sound pierced through the normally serene atmosphere of the medical facility like an alarm. Marcus had been explicitly told never to enter the nursery during his rounds. Human biology too different, his supervisor Kethvar had explained in broken standard. Might contaminate, might harm little ones. But the crying was getting worse, and he could see through the transparent aluminum doors that the night staff seemed overwhelmed. Inside the nursery, 3 Zephyrian attendants moved frantically between rows of biopods, each containing an infant of various alien species. The Zephyrians themselves looked like tall, slender humanoids with pale blue skin and elongated heads, their large black eyes reflecting their distress. Their usual calm demeanor had cracked under the pressure of dozens of crying babies. The infants were a diverse mix. Marcus could identify a few species from his brief orientation. The small, furry Vexani pups with their tiny clawed hands, the translucent Etherian children who glowed faintly when upset, and the solid, rock-like Croden younglings whose cries sounded like grinding stone. There were others he didn't recognize, but their distress was universal. One of the attendants, a young Zephyrian named Sithara, who had always been kind to Marcus, noticed him through the door. Her usual graceful movements were jerky with exhaustion, and her large eyes held a desperation that transcended species barriers. She approached the door but didn't open it, instead pressing her hand against the glass. 7 hours, she said through the intercom, her voice strained. 7 hours, they cry. Nothing works. Nutrition perfect, temperature correct, medical scans show no illness. We tried everything. Senior staff coming soon, but... She trailed off, looking back at the chaos behind her. Marcus studied the scene. He had helped raise his nephew back on Earth when his sister was working double shifts. Crying babies were crying babies, right? The technology here was far beyond anything Earth had. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe these alien infants needed something simpler. Something more... human. Let me try, Marcus said into the intercom. Sithara's head tilted in the characteristic Zephyrian expression of confusion. You? But regulations state... I know what the regulations say, Marcus interrupted gently. But look around. Your advanced medicine isn't working. What do you have to lose by trying something different? The Zephyrian attendant looked back at her colleagues, who were beginning to show signs of their own species' stress responses. Kelendos was unconsciously molting, leaving small blue scales on the floor, while Nix Theo's bioluminescent patches were flickering erratically. 1 minute, Sithara said finally. If senior staff arrives and finds human in nursery, we all face consequences. But these little ones... She looked at the crying infants with genuine anguish. They suffer, and we cannot help them. The door hissed open and Marcus stepped into the nursery. The sound hit him like a physical wall. Not just the volume, but the complexity of it. Different species, different vocal ranges, all blending into a symphony of infant distress. The air was thick with the scent of various alien physiologies and the ozone smell of high-tech medical equipment. Marcus set down his cleaning supplies and walked slowly through the room, observing. The Zephyrian attendants watched him nervously, clearly torn between hope and fear of breaking protocol. The biopods were marvels of engineering, each one perfectly calibrated for its occupant species, monitoring vital signs and adjusting environmental factors in real time. But as Marcus moved closer to the nearest pod containing a small Vexani pup, he noticed something the advanced sensors had missed. The little creature wasn't just crying, it was reaching. Its tiny clawed hands stretched upward, grasping at empty air. The biopod provided everything the infant needed to survive, but nothing for it to hold on to. Marcus looked around the room with new eyes. Every infant was alone in its perfect, sterile environment. No contact, no comfort beyond the mechanical precision of alien medical technology. He thought of his nephew, how the little boy would only stop crying when someone held him, rocked him, sang to him. When did this start? Marcus asked Sithara, after the evening meal. Usually they sleep peacefully through the night cycle. Tonight one began crying, then another, then all. Like distress signal spreading through the room. Marcus nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. These weren't just individual babies having individual problems. They were responding to each other, feeding off the collective distress. And in their sterile, perfectly controlled environment, there was nothing to break the cycle. He approached the Vexani pup's pod and looked at the control panel. The symbols were in Galactic Standard, which he could read well enough after 3 months on the station. Slowly, carefully, he began to adjust the environmental controls. "What are you doing?" Nix Theo asked nervously, his bioluminescent patches flashing in alarm patterns. "Something my grandmother taught me," Marcus replied, not looking up from the controls. "Sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all." Marcus finished adjusting the Vexani pup's biopod and slowly opened the transparent cover. The 3 Zephyrian attendants gasped in unison, their large eyes widening even further. Direct contact with the infants without full sterilization protocols was strictly forbidden. "Human Marcus, please," Sithara whispered urgently. "If contamination occurs, trust me," Marcus said softly, reaching into the pod. The tiny Vexani pup was no bigger than a kitten, its soft gray fur damp with tears. The moment Marcus's fingers touched its small form, the pup's crying shifted from desperate wailing to confused whimpering. Carefully, Marcus lifted the infant from its pod. The pup was lighter than he expected, its tiny heart beating rapidly against his palm. The other attendants watched in fascination and terror as Marcus cradled the small creature against his chest. "Your body temperature," Kellendos observed, his molting momentarily forgotten. "It is different from ours. Higher baseline, more variable. The biopods cannot replicate this." Marcus began to rock gently, the motion as natural as breathing. The Vexani pup's whimpering gradually subsided, replaced by small chittering sounds that Marcus hoped were positive. More importantly, several other infants in nearby pods had begun to quiet, their attention drawn to this unprecedented development. "In human culture," Marcus explained quietly, continuing his gentle rocking motion, "we have something called skin-to-skin contact. It regulates heart rate, breathing, temperature, not through technology but through biology, through presence." He moved slowly toward a pod containing one of the glowing Etherian infants. This one was slightly larger, its translucent skin pulsing with distressed yellow patterns. Marcus carefully opened the pod with his free hand. "I cannot allow this," Nix Theo said, but his voice lacked conviction. The change in the nursery's atmosphere was undeniable. Where there had been chaos, a strange calm was beginning to spread. "Look at them," Marcus said, nodding toward the other pods. "Really look." The attendants turned their attention to the remaining infants. Several had stopped crying entirely, pressing themselves against the transparent walls of their pods, reaching toward Marcus and the 2 babies he now held. The Croton youngling, whose cries had sounded like grinding stone, was making softer rumbling noises. Marcus settled into a chair near the center of the room, adjusting his position so both infants were comfortable. The Vexani pup had curled up against his chest, its tiny purr vibrating through his shirt. The Etherian infant rested in the crook of his other arm, its bioluminescence shifting from distressed yellow to curious blue-green. "Your species," Sithara said wonderingly. "You carry your young, yes? Not in artificial environments?" "For months," Marcus confirmed. "Human babies are born basically helpless. They need constant contact, warmth, attention. We evolved to need each other." He looked around the room at the remaining crying infants. "I think all babies might need more than perfect nutrition and climate control. They need to know they're not alone." The Zephyrian attendants exchanged glances, communicating in their subtle way through small head movements and color changes in their skin. Finally, Sithara approached another pod. "Show us," she said simply. Marcus guided her through the process, how to hold the small Andromedian infant with its 6 tiny limbs, where to support its elongated head, how to recognize signs of comfort versus distress. The little creature settled against Sithara's chest with a contented sigh that needed no translation. Kelendos was next, carefully lifting a crystalline silicate infant, whose tears had formed tiny geometric patterns on its faceted skin. The baby's crying stopped immediately upon contact, its surface beginning to emit a soft musical humming. Impossible, Nixthio murmured, but he was already reaching for another pod. Our medical training. All protocols state that infant development requires precise environmental controls. Monitored nutrition, sterile conditions, maybe, Marcus said, watching as more babies quieted simply from witnessing others being comforted. Your medical training missed something that evolution figured out millions of years ago. The last baby to be lifted was the Crodan youngling. Its rocky skin looked intimidating, but when Nixthio carefully picked it up, the infant proved to be surprisingly warm and soft. Its stone-like exterior more like flexible granite than actual rock. It settled against the Zephyrian's chest with a sound like distant thunder, but peaceful rather than threatening. The nursery had transformed. Where minutes before there had been chaos and distress, now there was an almost magical calm. 7 infants of different species, held by 3 aliens and 1 human, all content for the first time in hours. The biopods will register this as irregular, Kelendos pointed out, though he seemed reluctant to return his charge to its sterile environment. Let them, Marcus said. Sometimes irregular is what works. Cithara was studying her tablet, comparing the current readings to the previous hours of data. Stress indicators down 60% across all subjects. Heart rate stabilized. Brain activity patterns show increased delta waves consistent with preparation for sleep cycle. How long can we maintain this? Nixthio asked. Our shift ends in 3 hours. Day staff will not understand, Marcus considered this. The day staff would indeed panic at the sight of infants being held outside their controlled environments. But he had an idea forming, one that might revolutionize how the galaxy thought about infant care. What if this isn't about breaking protocol? He said slowly. What if this is about updating it? The Vexani pup in his arms had fallen asleep, its tiny form completely relaxed. The Etherian infant was also dozing, its bioluminescence dimmed to a soft, steady glow that Marcus somehow knew indicated deep contentment. Document everything, Marcus continued. Every measurement, every response. When your supervisors ask what happened, show them the data. Show them that sometimes the best technology is the technology we were born with. As if responding to his words, the nursery's automated systems chimed softly, indicating that all monitored infants had achieved optimal sleep patterns for the first time that night. The revolution had begun with something as simple as a hug. The next morning brought chaos of a different kind. Dr. Velthar, the chief medical officer, arrived to find detailed reports of unauthorized contact with quarantined infants, environmental protocol violations, and what the overnight system logs described as unexplained anomalous calm patterns. Marcus had gone home hours earlier, after helping the attendants document every aspect of the night's events. Now he sat in the facility's main conference room, still wearing his janitor's uniform, facing a panel of the most distinguished xenobiologists and pediatric specialists in the sector. Dr. Velthar was an imposing figure even by Zephyrian standards, her pale blue skin marked with the silver patterns that indicated advanced age and wisdom, her large black eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him acutely aware he was probably about to be fired and possibly deported. Human Marcus Rodriguez, she began, her standard accent more refined than the night staff's. You stand accused of endangering 7 infant lives through unauthorized contact, contamination protocols violation, and disruption of established medical procedures. Marcus straightened in his chair. Yes, ma'am. You do not deny these charges? No, ma'am. But I'd like to explain. Dr. Velthar held up a long, graceful hand. First, we will review the evidence. The conference room's holographic display activated, showing detailed medical readouts from the previous night. Marcus watched as the data painted a clear picture. 7 hours of escalating distress followed by rapid stabilization after his intervention. Stress hormone levels, Dr. Velthar narrated, her tone clinical, decreased by an average of 67% within minutes of contact initiation. Neural activity patterns shifted from distress indicators to optimal sleep preparation. Most remarkably, these improvements occurred not just in contacted subjects but in all infants within sensory range. Dr. Kythios, the facility's senior pediatrician, leaned forward. Explain to us, human Marcus, your medical training. I don't have any medical training, sir. I'm a janitor. Then explain your xenobiology expertise. I don't have that either. Your specialized knowledge of infant development across species? Marcus felt his face grow warm. None. I helped raise my nephew back on Earth. And last night those babies seemed like they needed what he used to need when he was upset. The silence that followed was deafening. Several of the alien doctors exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, Dr. Velthar spoke. You are telling this panel that you superseded 3 trained medical professionals and decades of established protocol based on experience with a single human infant? Yes, ma'am. More silence. Then unexpectedly, Dr. Velthar's expression shifted to what Marcus had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a smile, a slight softening around the eyes and a barely perceptible head tilt. Fascinating, she murmured. The doctor activated another section of the holographic display. These readings are from our sister facility on Kepler Station. For the past 6 months, they have been experiencing similar episodes of unexplained infant distress. Standard protocols have proven ineffective. Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Have they tried? No, until last night. The concept of deliberate physical contact with developing infants was considered medically contraindicated across all known species. Dr. Velthar turned to face him directly. Your actions have either committed 7 counts of medical malpractice or made the most significant advancement in interspecies pediatric care in recorded history. Dr. Kythios cleared his throat. The question becomes, was this an isolated incident or can these results be replicated? There's only one way to find out, Marcus said quietly. Dr. Velthar's smile became more pronounced. Indeed. However, we cannot simply allow unauthorized personnel to handle infants based on positive preliminary results. If we are to pursue this research, it must be done properly. She gestured to another member of the panel, a scholarly-looking alien with crystal formations growing from his skull. Dr. Quarith represents the Galactic Medical Council. If your methods prove effective, they will need to be studied, standardized, and potentially implemented across all member worlds. Dr. Quarith's voice resonated like wind through a cave. The implications are staggering. If physical contact proves beneficial across multiple species, our entire approach to infant care will require revision. Facilities throughout the galaxy will need retraining, new protocols, new equipment designed for contact rather than isolation. But first, Dr. Velthar continued, we need to understand why this works. Our preliminary analysis suggests that your species' higher body temperature, variable heartbeat, and specific pheromone signatures may have created a unique calming environment. We need to test whether these effects can be replicated artificially or if they require actual human presence. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. What does that mean for me? It means, human Marcus, that you are no longer a janitor. Effective immediately, you are our consultant on what we are tentatively calling contact therapy protocols. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly, and you will work directly with our research team. The room spun slightly. Marcus gripped the edge of the conference table. I don't understand. I'm not qualified. 3 hours ago, none of us were qualified to understand what you demonstrated, Dr. Kythios said gently. Qualification is not always about formal training. Sometimes it is about seeing what others cannot see. Dr. Velthar stood and the others followed suit. Your first assignment is to work with our 3 night attendants to develop preliminary protocols. We want to test your methods with different species combinations, various stress scenarios, and controlled environmental variables. She paused at the door. Oh, and human Marcus, we have already received communication from Kepler Station. They are requesting immediate consultation. It seems word of last night's events has traveled through unofficial channels. After the panel left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room, staring at the holographic displays that still showed the dramatic improvement in the infant's conditions. 12 hours ago, he had been mopping floors. Now he was apparently pioneering a new field of medicine. His tablet chimed with a message from Sithara. New crisis in nursery. Different babies, same problem. Your assistance requested urgently. Marcus smiled and headed for the door. It looked like his real work was just beginning. 2 weeks later, the nursery had become the most closely monitored medical facility in the sector. Scientists from 12 different worlds had arrived to observe what the media had dubbed the human touch protocol. Marcus found himself at the center of a revolution he never intended to start. The current crisis involved a clutch of Zephyrian triplets who had been abandoned as newborns. Unlike the mixed species group from his first night, these babies shared the same biology as their caregivers, which made their resistance to comfort all the more puzzling. Dr. Velthar stood beside Marcus as they observed the 3 tiny Zephyrians through the nursery's observation window. Despite being held by their own species using techniques Marcus had taught the staff, the triplets remained inconsolable. Stress indicators remain elevated, Dr. Kithios reported from his monitoring station. Contact therapy showing minimal effectiveness. Heart rates are stabilizing slightly, but neural stress patterns persist. Marcus studied the scene carefully. Over the past 2 weeks, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated an infant's emotional state, beyond just crying. The triplets were exhibiting what he had come to recognize as deeper distress, not just discomfort but genuine grief. "They're not just upset," Marcus said quietly. "They're mourning." Dr. Velthar's head tilted in the characteristic Zephyrian expression of puzzlement. "Mourning? They are newly hatched. They have no memory of their biological parents. Maybe not conscious memory," Marcus replied, watching as Sithara tried unsuccessfully to soothe the smallest triplet. "But they know something is missing. On Earth, we've learned that babies can sense when they're not with their biological family, even if they can't understand why." The observation deck fell silent except for the soft humming of monitoring equipment and the muffled crying from the nursery below. Dr. Quarith, who had extended his stay to observe the ongoing research, made a note on his crystalline datapad. "Fascinating hypothesis," Dr. Quarith said, his cave-like voice thoughtful. "But how does one address emotional trauma in infants who cannot verbally communicate their needs?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his nephew again, about the times when no amount of holding or rocking had helped. Sometimes the boy had needed something else entirely. "What do you know about their parents?" Marcus asked. Dr. Velthar accessed her tablet. "Very little. They were found outside a transit station on Xerion Prime. Biological scans suggest they are approximately 7 days old. No identification, no family records, but they're Zephyrian." "Obviously." Marcus shook his head. "I mean, are they from this world specifically?" "Can you tell what region, what community?" Dr. Kithios looked up from his monitoring station with interest. "Genetic markers would indicate regional variations, but we typically do not scan for such specific data unless there are medical concerns." "Scan them," Marcus said with growing excitement. "And while you're at it, scan Scythara, Kelindos, and Nixthio. I have a theory." 20 minutes later, the results appeared on the main display. Dr. Velthar studied them with growing amazement. "Remarkable," she breathed. "The triplets show genetic markers consistent with the Kandorian Peninsula region. Scythara's lineage traces to the same area, but Kelindos and Nixthio are from entirely different continents." Marcus nodded, pieces clicking into place. "On Earth, we've discovered that babies respond differently to people from their own ethnic background, even when they're too young to consciously recognize the differences. They can detect subtle variations in scent, vocal patterns, even facial structure at a subconscious level." "You believe the triplets are rejecting comfort from genetically dissimilar caregivers?" Dr. Quarith asked. "Not rejecting exactly, but they might need something more specific." Marcus activated the intercom to the nursery. "Sithara, can you try something for me?" The young Zephyrian looked up from the crying infant in her arms. "Of course, Marcus. Instead of using standard, try speaking to them in your regional dialect, whatever language you grew up speaking at home." Sithara's eyes widened with understanding. She began speaking softly to the triplet in what Marcus assumed was her native tongue. The change was immediate and dramatic. The infant's crying shifted from desperate wailing to confused whimpering, then to the soft chittering sounds that Marcus had learned indicated Zephyrian contentment. "Incredible," Dr. Velthar whispered. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Now try singing. Something your mother might have sung to you." Sithara's voice took on a melodic quality as she began what was clearly a traditional lullaby. The effect spread beyond the infant she was holding. The other 2 triplets, still in Kelindos and Nixthio's arms, began to calm as well, turning their tiny heads toward the familiar sounds of their ancestral home. Neural stress patterns dropping across all three subjects, Dr. Kithios reported in amazement. Heart rate synchronizing with Scythara's vocal rhythm. This is unprecedented. Dr. Quarth was furiously making notes. The implications extend far beyond simple contact therapy. We may need to consider genetic and cultural compatibility in all infant care protocols. Marcus watched as the three Zephyrian triplets finally found peace, not just from physical contact, but from the sound of home in a voice that carried the genetic memory of their people. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. Dr. Velthar, Marcus said quietly, we need to find out everything we can about where these babies came from, not just for medical reasons. They deserve to know their heritage. The chief medical officer nodded slowly. I will contact the authorities on Zirion Prime. Perhaps we can trace their family lineage, find relatives who might provide additional cultural context for their care. And maybe, Marcus added hopefully, find family who wants them home. As if responding to his words, the smallest triplet opened its large black eyes and looked directly at Marcus through the observation window. For a moment he could have sworn the tiny being understood exactly what he had said. The revolution was expanding beyond simple physical contact. They were discovering that caring for the young was about more than meeting basic biological needs. It was about connection, heritage, and the invisible threads that bound individuals to their communities across the vast expanse of space. Marcus smiled as Cythara continued her lullaby, her voice carrying the wisdom of generations across the sterile medical facility. Sometimes the most advanced medicine was also the most ancient. The emergency call came at 300 hours, 3 weeks after the triplet breakthrough. Marcus was pulled from sleep by his communicator's urgent chime and Dr. Velthar's strained voice. Marcus, we need you immediately. Kepler Station has transported critical cases here. A mixed group of infant refugees from the Proxima crisis. 12 babies, 6 different species, all showing severe trauma responses. They will not respond to any conventional treatment. Marcus dressed quickly and hurried through the empty corridors of the medical complex. The Proxima crisis had been dominating news feeds for weeks. A civil war that had torn apart one of the galaxy's most successful multi-species colonies. Millions of refugees were scattered across dozens of worlds, families separated, entire communities destroyed. The nursery was in chaos when he arrived. The 3 regular night attendants were supplemented by 6 additional medical staff, all looking exhausted and desperate. The 12 infant refugees were housed in emergency biopods, but their cries had taken on a quality Marcus had never heard before. Not just distress, but something deeper and more haunting. Dr. Kithios met him at the entrance, his usual calm demeanor cracked with strain. We have been attempting contact therapy for 4 hours with no success. These infants have experienced trauma beyond anything in our previous cases. Some were found in destroyed settlements, others in evacuation ships separated from their families for weeks. Marcus surveyed the room, taking in the complexity of the situation. Vexani pups huddled together in one pod, their tiny forms trembling with more than cold. 2 Etherian infants glowed with harsh, painful light, their distress made visible. A group of crystalline silicate babies produced discordant tones that made everyone in the room wince. Most heartbreaking were 3 human infants, their faces red with exhaustion from crying. Have you tried the cultural matching protocols? Marcus asked. Where possible, Cythara replied, cradling a small Andromedian infant. But many of these children are from mixed communities. Their caregivers could have been any species. Some may have never known single-species care. Marcus nodded grimly. The Proxima colony had been famous for its integrated society, where species barriers had largely dissolved. Children there grew up truly cosmopolitan, comfortable with the sights, sounds, and scents of dozens of different peoples. These infants weren't just traumatized, they were experiencing a kind of cultural shock that no single caregiver could address. Then we don't use single caregivers, Marcus said, an idea forming. We recreate what they lost. Dr. Velthar looked up from her monitoring station. Explain. These babies are used to diversity. They need to see, hear, and smell the mixture of species they grew up with. One Zephyrian caregiver isn't going to feel like home to a baby who was raised by a community. Marcus moved to the center of the room. Everyone, bring your infants here. All of them. We're going to try something new. The medical staff looked uncertain, but they followed his instructions. Soon, all 12 infant refugees were gathered in the center of the nursery, held by the diverse group of caregivers. "Now," Marcus said, "I want everyone to do what comes naturally to your species when comforting young. Don't worry about whether it's the right technique for the baby you're holding. Just be yourselves." Sithara began humming a Zephyrian lullaby. Kalendo started the rhythmic swaying motion his people used to calm their young. Nixtheo began producing the soft bioluminescent patterns that Zephyrian children found soothing. The visiting staff from other worlds contributed their own cultural comfort methods. The effect was immediate and remarkable. The harsh, discordant crying began to shift, becoming more harmonized as the infants responded to the complex symphony of comfort surrounding them. The Vexani pups stopped trembling and began their species' characteristic purring. The Etherian infants' harsh light softened to gentle, comfortable glows. Even the human babies began to calm as they were exposed to the rich diversity of alien comfort techniques. Neural stress indicators dropping across all subjects, Dr. Kithios reported in amazement. But the pattern is different from previous sessions. Instead of individual stabilization, we're seeing synchronized responses. Marcus watched as something beautiful unfolded. The babies weren't just calming, they were beginning to interact with each other across species lines. A tiny Vexani pup reached toward one of the human infants, who gurgled in response. The silicate baby's tone shifted from discord to harmony, creating a crystal wind chime effect that seemed to fascinate the other children. "They're remembering," Dr. Velthar said softly, "remembering what home felt like." But then Marcus noticed something troubling. 3 of the infants, 1 human, 1 Etherian, and 1 of the silicate babies, were not responding to the group therapy. They remained inconsolable despite being surrounded by the very diversity they had supposedly lost. Marcus approached the human infant, a little girl no more than 6 months old. As he drew closer, he noticed something the others had missed. Her tiny hands were clenched into fists, and when he gently opened one, he found a small object clutched inside. It was a simple braided cord, made from what looked like hair from multiple species woven together. The strands were different colors and textures, some silky like Etherian filaments, some coarse like Croton mineral fibers, some soft like Vexani fur. She's not just missing the community, Marcus realized. She's missing specific individuals. He looked at the cord more carefully and noticed something that made his heart clench. One of the strands was clearly human hair, but it was gray, the hair of an elderly person. Another strand was the distinctive blue-black of Zephyrian hair, and a third had the metallic sheen of Andromedean filaments. "This isn't just a random keepsake," Marcus said, holding up the cord for the others to see. "This is a memory anchor. Someone made this for her, probably her family. Each strand represents someone important to her." Dr. Quarith, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "Remarkable. A physical manifestation of emotional bonds. But how does this help us comfort her?" Marcus looked around the room at the diverse group of caregivers, then at the other 2 inconsolable infants. "We need to examine them too. I bet they have similar items." Sure enough, the Etherian infant was clutching a small crystal formation that held the sense of multiple species, and the silicate baby was resonating with a complex harmonic frequency that seemed to be programmed into its crystalline structure. "These aren't just comfort objects," Marcus said with growing excitement. "They're personalizations. These babies don't just need general community comfort. They need the specific signatures of their lost families." He turned to Dr. Velthar. "Can your scanners analyze these objects? Break down the genetic signatures, the scent compounds, the harmonic frequencies?" "Theoretically, yes. But what would be the purpose?" Marcus smiled, feeling the familiar rush of a solution coming together. "We're going to use them to help these babies remember they're not alone, and maybe, just maybe, help us find the families they belong to." The analysis took 18 hours, but the results changed everything. The braided cord clutched by the human infant contained genetic material from 7 different individuals across 4 species. The Etherian baby's crystal held molecular traces of a large extended family group. The silicate infant's harmonic frequency was actually a complex song, containing the vocal signatures of at least 12 different people. Dr. Velthar stood before the assembled medical team and refugee coordinators, displaying the analysis results on the main holographic screen. What we initially interpreted as simple comfort objects are actually sophisticated family archives. Each one contains enough biometric data to potentially identify specific individuals. Marcus held the human baby girl, who had finally found peace once the medical team had managed to synthesize approximations of the scent signatures embedded in her cord. She wasn't completely calm. Nothing could replace her actual family, but she was no longer in desperate distress. Commander Thorak, the Croton military officer overseeing refugee operations, studied the data with his characteristic intensity. His rock-like features were difficult to read, but Marcus had learned to recognize the subtle signs of Croton emotional states. "You are suggesting," Commander Thorak said slowly, "that these infants can be used to locate specific survivors among the millions of Proxima refugees scattered across 47 worlds?" "Not used," Marcus corrected firmly. "Helped. These babies aren't tools. They're children who deserve to be reunited with their families." Dr. Quarith's crystalline formations chimed softly as he processed the implications. The logistical challenges are staggering. Cross-referencing genetic markers across multiple refugee databases, coordinating with dozens of planetary governments, managing the legal complexities of interspecies adoption laws. "But possible?" Dr. Velthar asked. "Possible," Commander Thorak confirmed. "The Galactic Refugee Assistance Network has been struggling with family reunification since the crisis began. Most refugee children have been placed in temporary care facilities on their species' homeworlds. But mixed families," he trailed off, the enormity of the problem clear. Marcus looked down at the baby in his arms, thinking about his nephew again, about the importance of family connections that went beyond simple genetics. "What about the other 9 babies? The ones who responded to community comfort? Their situation is more complex," Dr. Kithios replied. "They show signs of having been raised communally rather than by specific family units. Finding their original caregivers may be impossible. Then we create new families," Marcus said simply. "Multi-species adoption groups. People who understand what these children need." The room fell silent. Marcus realized he had just suggested something that challenged fundamental assumptions about how families were formed across most galactic cultures. Commander Thorak was the first to speak. "Interspecies adoption is rare and legally complicated. Most worlds prefer to place children with their own species. Most worlds," Dr. Velthar said thoughtfully, "have not had the opportunity to observe what we have learned here. These children thrived in diversity. Separating them now, placing them in single-species environments could be its own form of trauma." Marcus felt his heart racing as an even bigger idea began to form. What if we don't place them at all? What if we keep them together? "Explain," Dr. Quarith requested. "Create a new community. Right here. A mixed-species family group with trained caregivers from multiple worlds. Let these children grow up together, the way they would have on Proxima." The silence that followed was longer this time. Marcus could practically see the wheels turning in everyone's minds as they considered the unprecedented nature of what he was suggesting. "A permanent multi-species nursery facility," Dr. Velthar said slowly, "with residential quarters for long-term care staff, educational facilities designed for mixed-species learning, medical staff trained in the contact therapy protocols we have developed. It would require approval from the Galactic Council," Commander Thorak pointed out. "Funding from multiple worlds. Legal frameworks that do not currently exist." "But the precedent is already here," Marcus argued, gesturing around the transformed nursery. "We've proven that diverse care not only works but produces better outcomes than traditional methods. These babies are healthier, happier, and more developmentally advanced than any of our previous cases." Dr. Kythios pulled up developmental comparison charts on his tablet. "The data supports this claim. Cognitive development markers, emotional stability indicators, social interaction patterns, all superior to baseline expectations. There is another consideration," Dr. Quarith said, his crystalline features catching the light as he turned toward Marcus. "You would need to be the director of such a facility. Your techniques, your understanding of cross-species infant care, cannot be easily transferred to others." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again, but this time it felt different. Not overwhelming, but purposeful. "I never intended to become an expert in alien baby care," he said with a small smile. "But these children deserve whatever expertise I can provide." "Then we write the proposal," Dr. Velthar decided. "Present it to the Galactic Council as a pilot program. Use our success here as evidence that radical approaches to refugee childcare are not just possible, but necessary." Commander Thorak nodded slowly. I will provide military support for the family reunification efforts. The Croton Defense Force has resources that could expedite the search process. And I will ensure the Galactic Medical Council reviews our protocols for adoption across all member worlds, Dr. Quarith added. As the meeting broke up and the various officials began making their preparations, Marcus remained in the nursery with the 12 refugee infants. 3 would hopefully be reunited with their original families. 9 would become the founding members of a new kind of family altogether. The baby girl in his arms stirred, making the soft sounds that Marcus had learned indicated contentment. She still clutched her braided cord, still carried the genetic memory of the family she had lost. But she was also, Marcus realized, beginning to form new bonds with the people caring for her now. Hey there, little one, he whispered. Looks like we're all learning what family means together. The revolution that had started with a simple hug was becoming something much larger, a fundamental reimagining of how children could be raised, how families could be formed, and how love could transcend the boundaries between species. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the observation deck of the new Proxima Children's Center, watching 17 children of 8 different species play together in the facility's common area. The center had been approved by the Galactic Council in record time, funded by contributions from dozens of worlds, and had become the most studied childcare facility in known space. The 3 refugee babies with family archives had all been successfully reunited with their relatives, the human girl with her grandmother who had survived in a refugee camp on Terra Nova, the Etherian infant with an uncle who had made it to the Andromeda system, and the silicate baby with the extended family group that had been scattered across 3 different worlds, but were now working toward reunification themselves. The other 9 had become the core of something unprecedented, the galaxy's first intentionally multi-species family. The developmental reports continued to exceed all projections, Dr. Velthar said, joining Marcus at the observation window. She now served as the facility's chief medical officer, having transferred from her previous position specifically to continue their research. Language acquisition, social development, problem-solving abilities. These children are achieving milestones we did not know were possible. Marcus smiled as he watched 4-year-old Zara, a Vexani child who had arrived as one of the original refugees, teaching 2 newer arrivals how to properly hold a crystalline silicate infant. The natural ease with which she bridged species differences never ceased to amaze him. Any word from the Galactic Council about expanding the program? Marcus asked. 12 new facilities have been approved for construction, Dr. Velthar replied. 3 are already operational. The demand from both refugee families and progressive adoptive parents far exceeds our current capacity. The center now housed 43 children ranging in age from newborn to 8 years old. They came from refugee situations, failed adoptions where single-species placement hadn't worked, and increasingly from families who specifically requested multi-species care for their children. Marcus, a young voice called from below. He looked down to see Tommy, one of the human children who had arrived 6 months earlier, waving excitedly. Come see what we built. Marcus made his way down to the play area, where a group of children had constructed an elaborate fort using building materials designed for multiple types of hands, claws, and appendages. The structure incorporated elements that appealed to different species: crystalline chimes for the silicate children, soft nesting areas for the Vexani, bioluminescent panels for those who communicated through light. It's beautiful, Marcus said, admiring their work. What is it? It's home, said Kithara, a young Zephyrian boy whose parents had died in an industrial accident. Everyone has their place, but we're all together. The simplicity and profundity of the statement took Marcus's breath away. These children had unconsciously solved problems that had challenged galactic society for generations. They didn't see species differences as barriers to overcome, but as complementary strengths that made their community stronger. Sithara approached with baby Mira, the newest arrival, a hybrid child whose very existence had been controversial on her homeworld. The afternoon feeding went well, she reported. The older children continued to help with the younger ones naturally. No prompting required. This had been one of the most remarkable discoveries. The children in multi-species care developed an instinctive understanding of what other species needed. They could recognize distress signals across species lines, offer appropriate comfort, and even serve as translators when communication barriers arose. Dr. Rodriguez, called Dr. Kitheos from across the room. Marcus still wasn't entirely comfortable with the title. His honorary doctorate from the Galactic Medical Academy had been awarded based on practical results rather than formal study, but he was learning to accept the recognition. We have visitors from the Andromedian Academy, Dr. Kitheos continued. They would like to discuss establishing a research partnership. Marcus nodded but didn't immediately move to join the meeting. He was content to watch the children for a few more minutes, marveling at what they had built together. Not just the fort, but the entire community that had grown around them. These children would grow up to be something new in galactic society, true citizens of a multi-species civilization rather than representatives of individual worlds who happened to coexist. They would understand intuitively what older generations had to learn through painful experience. That diversity was not a challenge to be managed, but a strength to be celebrated. Marcus, Tommy called again, this time climbing onto his shoulders with the casual assumption that he would be welcome there. Tell us the story about the first night again. The other children gathered around as they did most evenings, ready to hear the tale that had become their origin myth. Marcus settled into the comfortable chair that had been designed to accommodate multiple species clustering around a human-sized frame. It was a night like any other, Marcus began, his voice taking on the rhythm of a practiced storyteller. The babies were crying and nobody knew why. As he spoke, the children acted out familiar parts of the story, imitating the stressed alien medical staff, demonstrating how different species showed distress, celebrating the moment when the first baby stopped crying. They had heard this story hundreds of times, but it never lost its power, because it wasn't just a story about babies learning to be comforted. It was a story about what happened when someone was willing to try something new, to trust in the basic needs that transcended species boundaries, to believe that love was a universal language. And that, Marcus concluded as he did every evening, is how we learned that families aren't about being the same. Families are about caring for each other, no matter how different we might be. The children cheered and gradually dispersed to their evening activities, but Tommy remained on Marcus's shoulders. Marcus, the boy said quietly, do you think there are other babies out there who need what we have? Marcus looked out the great windows of the center at the stars beyond, thinking about the vast expanse of space filled with countless worlds and species, about the children who might be growing up alone when they could be growing up together. I'm sure there are, buddy, Marcus replied. But you know what? Every day, more people are learning what we learned here, and someday maybe children like you will be the ones teaching grown-ups how to build families that work for everyone. Tommy considered this seriously, then nodded with the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to children raised in diversity. Good, he said simply, because everyone deserves a home. As the twin suns set over the new Proxima Children's Center, casting rainbow light through the crystal panels that made the building beautiful to species across the visual spectrum, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them all here. It had started with something as simple as a human janitor who couldn't stand to hear babies cry. It had become a revolution that was changing how the galaxy thought about childhood, family, and the bonds that could unite beings across any divide. And it was just the beginning.